The Honda Civic would begin to sound like a cough, then a rattle, then nothing at all. Tamika Washington guided it to the gravel shoulder of Highway 45 and turned the key twice. Dead. She sat there for a minute with her hands on the wheel, staring at the check engine light that had been glowing since March. The highway stretched in both directions through flat Mississippi farmland, cotton fields, and fence posts. No gas station, no houses, close enough to walk to before the September sun went down. She was 20 years old with $58 in her pocket and a duffel bag in the back seat that held everything she owned. 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, a jacket with a broken zipper, and an olive green tin box that had belonged to her grandmother Bernie. The tin held a sewing kit, needles, thread, a thimble, a measuring tape, and a photograph of Bernie tucked inside the lid. It was the only thing Tamika had kept through 6 group homes and 2 years of sleeping in the backseat of this car. She grabbed the duffel and the tin box and locked the car out of habit, even though there was nothing left worth stealing. Then she started walking. The sign said Thornton 2 miles. She had never heard of it. The afternoon heat pressed down on her shoulders. By the time she saw the water tower in the distance, her shirt was stuck to her back and her feet hurt in the second-hand sneakers that were half a size too small. Thornton appeared slowly. First the water tower, then a church steeple, then rooftops. Main Street was 4 blocks long. A diner called Rosie's with a hand-painted sign, a hardware store, a post office, a barber shop with a faded photograph of Martin Luther King in the window. She smelled fried catfish from the diner and her stomach clenched. She had eaten a gas station sandwich at noon, saved half of it for later. At the end of Main Street, the county courthouse had a parking lot full of pickup trucks and folding chairs. A white man with a microphone stood on a flatbed trailer holding up a clipboard. Lot 11, he called out. John Deere mower, 1982, runs on a good day starting at $40. A county surplus auction. Tamika had seen them before in other towns. Cities and counties selling off whatever they did not want anymore. Equipment vehicles foreclosed land. She drifted closer, standing at the edge of the crowd, because at least it was something to watch while she figured out her next move. Lots came and went. A tractor sold for $300. A shipping container went for $80. Someone paid $250 for a box truck with a bad transmission. Then the auctioneer's voice shifted. He smiled at the crowd, the kind of smile that said he already knew this was going to be funny. Lot 14, he said, half-acre east side of town, formerly the site of the municipal water tower. Tower collapsed during the storm of 2016. Parcel includes the foundation, all remaining debris, and whatever wildlife's moved in since. Starting bid $5. Nobody moved. A few people laughed. The auctioneer shrugged. Come on, folks, $5. You spend more than that on coffee. Nothing. Going once, he said, raising his gavel. Going twice. $5, Tamika said. Every head turned. She felt the stares land on her. A young black woman with a duffel bag and dirt on her jeans buying a lot full of rubble. The auctioneer blinked. We have 5. Do I hear 10? Silence. Sold, he said, bringing the gavel down. Lot 14 to the young lady in the back. See the clerk for paperwork. A man in a seed cap leaned over to his wife. She just bought a pile of junk. His wife shook her head. Poor thing probably doesn't know any better. Tamika did not care what they thought. She needed somewhere to sleep, and a half-acre of land with her name on it was better than a highway shoulder or another night in a car that no longer ran. The clerk was a white woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain. She took Tamika's $5 bill, had her sign 3 forms, and handed her a folded property deed. Lot 14, the woman said. East on Maple, past the grain elevator, right on Tower Road. You cannot miss it. She paused, looking at Tamika over her glasses. Well, you cannot miss what is left of it. You sure about this, honey? That lot has not got utilities. No water hookup, nothing. I am sure, Tamika said. The woman's expression said she thought Tamika was making a mistake, but she did not argue. She stamped the deed and slid it across the counter. Good luck. Tamika walked east. The sun was dropping now, painting the sky copper and rust. She passed the grain elevator, turned right, and followed a dirt road for a quarter mile until she saw it. The lot was exactly what the auctioneer had described. Half an acre of weeds and gravel surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence with a gate hanging open on one hinge. In the center, the remains of the water tower lay scattered like the bones of something enormous. Twisted steel beams, chunks of concrete. The cylindrical tank itself had split open and lay on its side, half buried in dirt and wild grass. It was a wreck, but the ground was flat. The fence offered some privacy, and there was a patch near the north edge sheltered by the remains of a concrete wall where she could set up a tarp. She climbed through the gate and dropped her duffel bag on the ground. Then she heard it, a low sound, a whimper coming from inside the split tank. Tamika froze. She picked up a length of rebar, holding it like a bat, and walked slowly toward the opening. The last light of the day angled through the gap in the steel. She saw movement. A dog. Thin ribs showing through dirty brown and black fur curled against the inner wall of the fallen tank. A German shepherd with dark eyes that watched her without blinking. "Hey," Tamika said softly. "Hey, it is okay." The dog did not growl, did not run, just watched. Tamika set down the rebar and pulled the other half of her gas station sandwich from her bag. Turkey and cheese on stale bread. She unwrapped it and set it on the ground, then backed away. The dog waited a full minute before moving. Then it stood, limped forward on a front leg that favored the left side, and ate the sandwich in 3 bites. "You live here?" Tamika asked. The dog looked at her. Its tail moved once, a single cautious wag. "Yeah," Tamika said. "Me too, I guess." She set up camp that night using a blue tarp from her duffel bag and 2 chunks of concrete as anchors. The dog, who she started calling Duke because he kept circling the perimeter of the lot like he was on patrol, settled about 10 feet away and watched her work. By the time she lay down on the hard ground, with her jacket folded under her head, the stars were out. More stars than she had ever seen. Growing up in the system, she had always been in cities. Fluorescent lights in group homes, street lamps through shelter windows. She had never seen a sky like this. Duke inched closer during the night. By morning, he was lying against her side. The first 3 days were about survival. Tamika found a public restroom behind the courthouse that was unlocked during business hours. She filled water bottles at the sink. She ate sparingly, stretching her remaining dollars with bread and peanut butter from a gas station 2 miles down the highway. And she worked. She cleared rubble by hand, dragging steel beams to the fence line, stacking broken concrete in piles, pulling weeds from the foundation. She did not have a plan beyond making the space livable. But work was something she understood. Bernie had taught her that. When everything else falls apart, you use your hands. On the 4th morning, a pickup truck slowed on Tower Road and pulled over. A black woman climbed out, maybe late 60s, with silver hair cut short and hands that looked like they had spent a lifetime gripping tools. She wore a canvas apron over her shirt and carried a jug of water. "You the one who bought the water tower lot?" she said. It was not a question. "That is me," Tamika said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Loretta Hayes. I own the hardware store on Main." She held out the water jug. "Brought you this. You have been out here 4 days with no running water. People notice." Tamika took the jug. "Thank you." Loretta looked around the lot, taking in the piles of sorted rubble, the cleared foundation, the tarp shelter. Duke sat beside Tamika, alert, watching Loretta with calm interest. "You have done all this by hand," Loretta said. "Do not have much else." Loretta studied her for a long moment. "That tower fell 8 years ago. Storm took it down. County said it was not worth rebuilding because half the town was already on well water by then. Nobody has touched this lot since." "Somebody left a dog in it," Tamika said, scratching Duke behind the ear. "Dogs find their way to places that need them," Loretta said. She reached into the truck bed and pulled out a pair of leather work gloves. "Here, your hands are going to be hamburger if you keep going bare." Tamika hesitated. She had learned not to take things from people. Everything came with a price or got taken back or meant you owed someone. Loretta saw it in her face. "They are just gloves," she said. "I have got a whole store full of them. Come by if you need anything else. I will run you a tab." "I cannot pay a tab right now." "I did not ask you to pay it right now." Loretta climbed back into her truck. "That tower lot has been sitting empty for 8 years. You are the first person to do anything with it. That counts for something." She drove off, leaving a small cloud of dust on the dirt road. Tamika put on the gloves. They fit. Over the next 2 weeks, she fell into a rhythm. Wake at dawn, work until the heat peaked, walk to town for water and whatever food she could afford, work until dark, sleep on the ground with Duke pressed against her. The rubble pile shrank. The foundation emerged. It was bigger than she had expected. A concrete slab about 30 feet across with a raised rim where the tower's base had been anchored. Steel bolts still jutted from the perimeter, rusted to a dark orange. Loretta came by every few days, sometimes with water, once with a bag of sandwiches from the diner. She never stayed long and never asked personal questions. She would look at the progress, nod, and leave. Some things are worth more than what they cost, Loretta said one afternoon, looking at the cleared lot. $5. Who knew? On the 17th day, Tamika was pulling a section of collapsed steel paneling off the east side of the foundation when Duke started digging. He had been doing this all morning, scratching at one particular spot near the center of the slab, where two large concrete sections met. She had told him to stop twice, but he kept coming back to it. Now he was digging hard, his front paws throwing dirt and gravel behind him, whining low in his throat. Duke, hey, what are you doing? She walked over and crouched beside him. The concrete here was different. She ran her gloved hand along the surface and felt it. A seam. Not a crack from the collapse, but a deliberate line where two sections of concrete had been poured separately with a thin gap between them sealed with something dark. Tar maybe, or caulk. She knocked on the surface with her knuckle. The section on the right sounded solid. The section on the left sounded hollow. Tamika sat back on her heels. Her pulse picked up. She had been around enough construction sites during her time bouncing between group homes to know what a foundation was supposed to look like. Poured concrete rebar anchor bolts. Simple. But a sealed panel in the center of a foundation that was not standard. Someone had built this on purpose. She borrowed a pry bar from Loretta the next morning and came back to the spot. Duke sat beside her, watching his ears forward. She worked the flat end of the bar into the seam and pushed. The old sealant cracked and crumbled. She pushed harder, and the concrete panel shifted. Just an inch, but enough to confirm what she had suspected. There was a space underneath. Tamika worked for 2 hours prying the panel loose piece by piece. The concrete was thick, maybe 4 inches, and heavy enough that she had to lever each section aside with the bar and her full body weight. Duke paced in circles, whimpering. When the opening was finally wide enough, she looked down. A chamber. Maybe 6 feet deep, 4 feet across, lined with poured concrete walls that were dry and clean. Not a crack, not a leak. Whoever built this had known what they were doing, and at the bottom, resting on the dry concrete floor, was a wooden box wrapped in dark oilcloth. Tamika stared at it. Her heart was hammering. The September wind blew across the open lot, rattling a loose piece of steel somewhere behind her. Duke leaned forward, nose pointed straight down into the chamber, and let out a single bark. Something had been buried here, buried carefully, deliberately by someone who wanted it found. Tamika lowered herself into the chamber. It smelled like damp earth and something older. Mineral stone that had not seen air in decades. Her boots hit the concrete floor, and she crouched, her eyes adjusting to the dim light that filtered down through the opening above. The box was about the size of a milk crate oilcloth, wrapped tight around it, secured with twine that had gone brittle with age. She lifted it carefully, surprised by its weight, and climbed back out into the daylight. Duke pressed his nose against the box, immediately sniffing every inch of it. Easy, Tamika said. Let me see what we have got. She sat cross-legged on the concrete slab and cut the twine with her pocket knife. The oilcloth fell away, revealing a wooden box with dovetailed corners and a hinged lid. No lock. The wood was dark walnut, smooth and carefully finished. Someone had taken time building this. She lifted the lid. Inside, packed tightly and organized with care, were 4 items. A leather-bound journal, its cover worn soft and dark. A stack of photographs wrapped in wax paper. A bundle of papers tied with a faded blue ribbon. And a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges with handwriting across the front in careful script. Tamika picked up the envelope first. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, the kind that came from a generation that had learned penmanship in school. It read, "To whoever carries the Washington name forward." Her hand went still. Washington. Her name, her mother's name, her grandmother Bernie's married name. She set the envelope down and picked up the journal. The leather was cracked along the spine, and when she opened it, the pages were stiff but intact. The first entry was dated April 12, 1957. Started work on the municipal water system today. The council voted 6-1 to approve the project. Mayor Davis shook my hand and said the town has been waiting 20 years for clean water. I told them we would have it running by fall. My name is Isaiah Washington, and I am the new water commissioner of Thornton. Tamika read the words twice. Isaiah Washington, water commissioner, the man who built the tower she was sitting on. She turned pages carefully. Isaiah wrote about pipe layouts and pump capacities, about digging trenches in July heat, about the satisfaction of watching water flow through a system he designed with his own hands. He wrote about his wife Ellen, who brought him lunch at the worksite every day. He wrote about their daughter. Kiara is 3 today. Ellen made a cake with pink frosting, and Kiara got it everywhere. In her hair on the wang on my good shirt. I do not care. She is the best thing I have ever built. Tamika stopped reading. She stared at the name on the page until her vision blurred. Kiara. Her mother's name was Kiara. Kiara Washington, who died in a car accident when Tamika was 4. Kiara, who Tamika barely remembered except for the smell of her shampoo and the sound of her voice singing in the kitchen. She unwrapped the photographs with shaking hands. The first showed a young black man in work clothes standing in front of a steel framework grinning. He was tall, lean, with dark hair and a jaw that Tamika recognized because she saw it every morning in whatever mirror was available. Behind him rose the skeleton of the water tower, half-built beams reaching into a clear sky. Isaiah Washington, her grandfather. The next photographs were family pictures. Isaiah and a light-skinned black woman with kind eyes and soft hair standing on a porch. Isaiah holding a baby wrapped in a white blanket. A little girl, maybe 5 or 6, sitting on a tractor with Isaiah beside her. Both of them laughing. The little girl had dark hair and a gap-toothed smile that looked exactly like the one photograph Tamika had of her mother as a child, the one Bernie had kept on the dresser in their apartment. Tamika laid the photographs on the concrete beside her and tried to breathe. Her throat was so tight it hurt. She had a grandfather. He had lived here. He had built here. He had built the tower she was sitting on, and he had sealed a box of his life into its foundation before he left. She did not open the sealed letter. Not yet. She needed to understand the rest first. She spent the next 3 hours reading Isaiah's journal from beginning to end. Duke lay beside her head on her knee while the September sun tracked across the sky and the shadows lengthened. The first years were good. Isaiah finished the water system in 1956, a year ahead of schedule. The town threw a celebration. Clean water for every home in Thornton, white and black. Isaiah was proud of the work, and the journal showed it. He wrote about maintenance schedules and pump upgrades, about training a part-time assistant, about the pleasure of a system that worked the way it was supposed to. Then around 1959, the tone changed. A man named Clayton Pierce had moved to the area and started buying farmland east of town. Pierce wanted to develop the land-built houses, attract new residents. But he needed water rights. The town's municipal supply, the one Isaiah had built, was the only reliable source. Pierce approached the town council with a proposal. He would invest in expanding the water system if the town granted him development rights to the water supply. Isaiah opposed it. He wrote about it in plain, angry language. Pierce does not want to improve the system. He wants to own it. Once he controls the water, he controls who builds where, who pays what, who gets served, and who does not. I told the council this at the meeting. Half of them listened. The other half were looking at the check Pierce was waving around. The entries grew darker. Pierce started a campaign against Isaiah. Rumors that Isaiah had mismanaged public funds. Questions about receipts and invoices that had always been in order. A letter to the county newspaper suggesting an audit. The audit found nothing wrong. Every dollar was accounted for, but the damage was done. 3 council members who had supported Isaiah changed their votes. In March of 1961, the council voted 4-3 to replace Isaiah as water commissioner. They did not fire me for cause. They eliminated the position, created a new one with a different title, and gave it to a man Pierce had recommended. Same job, different name, different person, legal technically, but everyone knew what happened. Tamika could feel his anger in the handwriting. The letters pressed harder into the page, the lines less even. The next entries were written over several days in quick succession. Isaiah sealed the chamber. He described the process. Mixing the concrete, pouring the walls, waterproofing the interior, placing the box inside, sealing the panel, and covering it with rubble so it looked like part of the foundation. If they take everything else, they cannot take what is buried in the thing I built with my own hands. Those were the last words Isaiah wrote in Thornton. The next entry was dated 2 weeks later from a motel in Missouri. We left, Ellen, Kiara, and me. I loaded what I could into the truck and we drove south. Ellen is sick. She will not say how bad, but I can see it. Kiara cried the whole first day. She is 8 now, old enough to know we are running, but too young to understand why. I told her we would come back someday. I do not know if that is true. Tamika closed the journal. The sun was nearly gone. She sat in the fading light on the foundation her grandfather had built, holding the book that held his life. And the tears came without warning. Silent, steady tears that she let fall because there was nobody to hide them from except Duke, and Duke did not judge. She had spent her entire life believing she came from nothing, that she had been passed along and left behind because nobody wanted her. Bernie had been the exception, but Bernie had died when Tamika was 14, and after that, Tamika had assumed the pattern was permanent. People left. That is what they did. But Isaiah had not left because he wanted to. He had been driven out. The next morning, Tamika walked into town carrying the journal and the photographs. She went straight to the hardware store. Loretta was stacking boxes of nails when Tamika walked in. She took one look at Tamika's face and set down the box. What happened? Tamika placed the journal and the photographs on the counter. I found something under the foundation. A sealed chamber with a box inside. She opened the journal to the first page. Isaiah Washington. He was the water commissioner. He built the tower. Loretta leaned forward, reading the entry. Her expression shifted from curiosity to something quieter. Recognition. Isaiah Washington, Loretta said slowly. My father talked about him, said he was the best thing that ever happened to this town's water supply. Then there was some kind of trouble and he left. She looked up at Tamika. Washington, that is your last name. He was my grandfather. Loretta stared at her. You are sure? Tamika showed her the photograph of Kiara as a little girl. That is my mother, Kiara Washington. She died when I was 4. I was raised by my grandmother, Bernie, who was married to Isaiah's son. She paused. Bernie never talked about Thornton, never mentioned Isaiah or the tower or any of this. I did not know any of it existed until Duke dug up the foundation. Loretta sat down on the stool behind the counter and was quiet for a long time. Then she said, come with me. She led Tamika to the back room of the store where a filing cabinet stood against the wall. Loretta pulled out a drawer and riffled through old papers until she found a folder marked Town Records Miscellaneous. Inside were photocopied pages from the county archive, meeting minutes from the 1950s and 60s property transfers, commission appointments. Loretta spread them on the workbench. There she said, pointing to a page dated August 1955, Isaiah Washington appointed water commissioner by unanimous vote of the Thornton Town Council. She flipped through more pages. And here, March 1961, motion to restructure the water commissions sponsored by council members Hewitt, Dawson, and Pierce. Pierce, Tamika said. Clayton Pierce. He sat on the council for 2 years. His grandson is Dalton Pierce, runs the biggest development company in the county now. Loretta's voice was flat. The Pierces have had their hands in this town for 3 generations. Tamika picked up the 1961 minutes and read them. The language was dry and bureaucratic, but the meaning was clear. Isaiah Washington had been replaced. His position had been dissolved and recreated under Pierce's influence. The man who built the town's water system had been erased from it. My grandfather did not mismanage anything, Tamika said. The audit cleared him. It is all in the journal. I believe you, Loretta said. My father always said something was not right about how Isaiah left. He said Isaiah was honest to a fault. She looked at Tamika with steady eyes. You are never too broken to build something, Tamika. Your grandfather proved that, and you are proving it right now. Tamika spent the rest of that day reading the journal cover to cover in Loretta's back room, while Loretta ran the store and brought her coffee without being asked. The later entries were shorter, written from motels and rented rooms as Isaiah moved his family south. Ellen got sicker. Kiara started school in a new town. Isaiah worked odd jobs, plumbing and pipe fitting. The skills that had built Thornton's water system, now earning him just enough to keep his family fed. The journal ended abruptly in 1963. The last entry was 3 lines long. Ellen's treatment is expensive. Kiara needs new shoes. The bonds are safe. Someday I will go back for them. Bonds. Tamika flipped back through the pages searching. There it was in a 1960 entry. Isaiah had been buying U.S. savings bonds with portions of his salary since 1956. Small amounts, $50 or $100 at a time. He had stored them in the box before sealing the chamber. Tamika thought about the bundle of papers tied with the blue ribbon. She had not examined them yet. She thanked Loretta and walked back to the lot. The papers were still in the box where she had left them, covered with a tarp. She untied the ribbon and spread them on the concrete. Savings bonds. Series E dated between 1956 and 1962. 16 bonds in total, ranging from $50 to $500 in face value. Tamika did not know exactly what matured savings bonds were worth, but she knew they grew over time. These were more than 60 years old. She was still sitting there counting bonds when she heard the crunch of tires on the dirt road. A black SUV, clean and expensive, pulled through the open gate and stopped 20 feet from where she sat. The engine idled for a moment, then cut off. A white man stepped out. Late 40s gray at the temples, wearing a blue dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He had the build of someone who had played football in college and kept enough of it to still look imposing. He looked around the lot, taking in the cleared rubble, the organized piles, the tarp shelter, and Tamika sitting on the foundation with papers spread around her. "You the one who bought this parcel at the surplus auction," he said. Same flat declarative tone that Loretta had used, but without the warmth. "I am. I am Dalton Pierce. Pierce Development." He pulled a business card from his shirt pocket and held it out. Tamika did not take it. He set it on the nearest pile of concrete. This property was slated for condemnation. The auction should never have included it. "I have been in contact with the county assessor's office, and I will be filing a formal challenge to the sale." Duke stood up from where he had been resting and moved to Tamika's side. His ears were flat. A low rumble started in his chest. "The sale was legal," Tamika said. "I signed the paperwork with the county clerk." "Paperwork can be reviewed." Dalton's voice was calm, practiced. "I am not trying to make trouble for you, but this parcel was part of a development plan that has been in progress for 2 years. The county was supposed to hold it for commercial rezoning, not dump it in a surplus auction for $5. "But they did," Tamika said, "and I bought it." Dalton looked at her for a long moment, then at Duke, who had not stopped growling. "You should think about what you are doing here. A half-acre of rubble with no utilities, no water hookup, no septic. You cannot build on this. You cannot live on this." "I am already living on it." Something flickered across his face. Surprise or maybe irritation at being told something he had not expected to hear. "I will be in touch," Dalton said. He turned back to the SUV, opened the door, and paused. "For what it is worth, I would advise you to cooperate. These things go easier when both sides are reasonable." He drove away. The dust from his tires drifted across the lot and settled. Tamika looked down at the savings bonds spread around her, then at Isaiah's journal, then at the photograph of her grandfather standing in front of the tower he had built with his own hands. A Pierce had driven Isaiah Washington out of this town 60 years ago. Now another Pierce was standing on the same ground, telling his granddaughter to leave. Tamika gathered the bonds, the journal, and the photographs. She carried them to her tarp shelter and wrapped them carefully in the oilcloth. "We are not going anywhere," she said to Duke. Duke pressed his head against her leg and stayed. The letter from Pierce's lawyer arrived 3 days later. Loretta brought it to the lot, holding it between two fingers. "Certified mail," Loretta said. "Came to my store because you do not have a mailbox. I signed for it." Tamika opened it, standing in the morning sun, Duke sitting at her feet. The language was dense and formal, but the message was simple. Pierce Development was formally challenging the auction sale of Lot 14 on grounds that the parcel had been improperly listed. A hearing would be scheduled with the County Board of Supervisors. In the meantime, the letter advised Tamika to refrain from any construction or modification of the property. "Can they do this?" Tamika asked. "They can file whatever they want," Loretta said. "Does not mean they will win." "Come on, let's go talk to someone who actually knows the law around here." They drove to the county clerk's office in Loretta's truck. The same white woman who had sold Tamika the lot, Mrs. Delano, was behind the counter. She peered over her reading glasses. "I remember you. Lot 14, the water tower." Loretta explained the situation. Mrs. Delano pulled the file and spread it on the counter, running her finger down each page. "The listing was proper," she said. "The parcel was declared surplus by the county assessor 18 months ago. It went through the standard 90-day review period. No objections were filed during that window." She tapped the signature line. "This sale is clean." "So Pierce's challenge has no basis," Loretta said. "I did not say that. He can still argue to the board that the assessor made an error or that the parcel should have been held for rezoning. The board can review it. But as of today, this sale is legally valid and Miss Washington is the property owner." Tamika let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Thank you." Mrs. Delano looked at her with an expression that was hard to read. "For what it is worth, I grew up in this town. I remember when that tower was standing. My father always said the man who built it was the most honest person he had ever met." She closed the file. "Good luck." Back at the lot, Tamika sat on the foundation with the bonds spread in front of her, 16 bonds. She had counted them 3 times. She needed to know what they were worth, but she was afraid of the answer. Afraid it would be nothing that 60 years of waiting had produced a stack of expired paper. And afraid in a different way that it would be something real. She was still sitting there when a voice called from the fence line. "You have been at this a while." She looked up. An older black man stood at the gate, maybe early 70s, with white hair under a canvas hat and a frame that had once been bigger than it was now. He wore a flannel shirt tucked into work pants and carried a toolbox. "I am Vernon Brooks," he said. "I live about a quarter mile that way." He pointed east toward a small farmhouse visible through the trees. "I have been watching you move rubble for 3 weeks. That is a long time to watch. Wanted to see if you would stick with it." Tamika stood up and brushed off her jeans. "I do not have anywhere else to go." Vernon nodded as if that was a perfectly reasonable answer. "I am a carpenter, retired. My wife passed 2 years ago, and I have been building things in my garage to keep busy. Birdhouses mostly. My daughter says I have made enough birdhouses for every bird in the county." He opened the toolbox. Inside were hammers, a tape measure, a level, and a set of chisels that looked like they had been cared for over decades. "You have got a cleared foundation and no structure. If you want help framing something, I am available." Tamika studied him. He had steady hands and clear eyes. He did not fidget or try to sell her on anything. He just stood there offering. "Why?" she asked. Vernon looked at the foundation, then at the sky, then back at her. "Because I am 72 years old and I am tired of building birdhouses. And because my wife, Carol, she would have been out here on day one with sandwiches and lumber if she had been alive. She was that kind of person. I am slower than she was, but I got here." Tamika felt the corner of her mouth pull upward despite herself. "I cannot pay you." "Did not ask for pay. I asked if you wanted help." She looked at Duke, who had walked over to Vernon and was sniffing his boots. The dog sat down beside him, which was something Duke had not done with anyone except Tamika and Loretta. "Okay," Tamika said. "Show me how to frame a wall." Vernon smiled for the first time. It changed his whole face. "Get me 2 sawhorses and a straight piece of lumber, and I will show you everything I know." They started that afternoon. Vernon brought more tools from his garage and a stack of scrap lumber he had been hoarding. He showed Tamika how to measure twice cut once. He showed her how to check a corner with a framing square and how to plumb a post with a level. He was patient in the way of someone who had taught these things before and did not mind teaching them again. By the end of the first day together, they had the skeleton of a wall section lying flat on the foundation. It was not much, but it was a start. "That is solid work," Vernon said, stepping back to look at it. "I had a good teacher. My grandmother Bernie taught me how to fix things around the house. Plumbing, drywall, wiring. Smart woman." She was. Tamika ran her hand along the top plate of the wall frame. "She raised me after my mom died. Worked 2 cleaning jobs so we could keep the apartment. I used to help her fix things in the building because the landlord would not." She paused. "She died when I was 14. Vernon was quiet for a moment. "Carol died 2 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Fast." He picked up a nail that had fallen and put it in his pocket. "The house feels wrong without her in it. Too quiet. Building things helps." They did not say anything else about it. They did not need to. That evening, after Vernon had gone home, Tamika sat in her tarp shelter with Isaiah's journal open on her lap. She turned to the entries. She had not finished reading the ones from Missouri. Isaiah wrote about Ellen's declining health, treatments that cost more than he could earn. Kiara growing up angry and confused, asking why they had left their home. Isaiah taking jobs beneath his skill level because nobody in Missouri needed a water commissioner. In 1963, the entries became sparse. Ellen was in the hospital more than she was out of it. Isaiah sold the truck to pay medical bills. Kiara had started sneaking out at night. Then in a 1964 entry that took up a full page, Isaiah wrote about a fight. "Kiara told me she hates me. Said I ruined her life by leaving Thornton. Said she is never going back to that town, and she is never going to forgive me for taking her away from her friends. She is 13. I told her I did not have a choice. She said everyone has a choice, and I chose wrong." Tamika's chest tightened. She knew that anger. She had felt it herself directed at Bernie sometimes when she was young, and did not understand why they lived the way they did, why they moved so often, why Bernie worked all the time. It was easier to be angry at the person in front of you than at the systems that made life hard. Isaiah had written more. "I do not know if she is right. I have asked myself that question 1,000 times. Could I have stayed and fought Pierce? Could I have gone to the state, filed a complaint, hired a lawyer? Maybe. But Ellen was sick, and the town had turned on me, and I was scared. I made the choice I thought would keep my family safe. I do not know if it was the right one. I just know it was the only one I could see. Tamika closed the journal and stared at the sky. Isaiah's words sat in her chest, heavy and familiar. She knew that feeling. The feeling of making the best choice available and still wondering if it was wrong. The next morning, she took the bonds to the First National Bank on Main Street. She walked in with them in a manila envelope, wearing the cleanest clothes she had, and asked to see someone about savings bonds. The teller, a young white man, looked at the bonds, looked at Tamika, and excused himself to get his manager. The manager was an older white woman named Mrs. Porter, who brought Tamika to her office and spread the bonds on her desk one by one. These are Series E bonds, Mrs. Porter said, adjusting her glasses. Issued between 1956 and 1962. They have all reached final maturity. She pulled up a calculator and began entering numbers, checking each bond's face value against a maturity table on her computer screen. You understand these have been earning interest for over 60 years. Tamika's hands were clasped tight in her lap. How much are they worth? Mrs. Porter finished her calculations and set down her pen. She looked at Tamika with an expression that Tamika would remember for a long time. The combined matured value of these 16 bonds is $52,341. The number did not register at first. It sounded like a sentence in a foreign language. Tamika heard the words, but they did not connect to anything real. I am sorry, she said. How much? $52,341. Tamika sat very still. Her vision narrowed to a point, then expanded, then narrowed again. She gripped the arms of the chair. Are you all right? Mrs. Porter asked. Yes, Tamika said, though her voice came out as a whisper. I am fine. I just need a minute. Mrs. Porter gave her the minute. She gave her 5. When Tamika could breathe again, they discussed the process for redeeming the bonds. It would take about 2 weeks with some paperwork to verify Tamika's identity and her connection to Isaiah Washington as his descendant. The property deed and the journal would help establish the chain. Mrs. Porter made copies of everything. Before Tamika left, Mrs. Porter said something else. These bonds, they were not easy for a black man to buy in the 1950s. Most banks would not serve black customers for investment products. Your grandfather probably bought these through the post office, paying a little at a time. She looked at the inscription on one of the bonds written in careful ink. For Kiara's education, IW 1960, he was saving for your mother's future. Tamika's throat closed up again. She thanked Mrs. Porter and walked out into the October sunlight. She got into Loretta's truck, which Loretta had loaned her for the errand, and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes without starting the engine. Then she cried. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and sobbed. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep, the kind that empties you out and leaves you lighter. She had never in her life had more than $400 at one time. She had eaten gas station sandwiches and slept in her car and worked double shifts at restaurants that paid her under the table. She had gone to bed hungry more times than she could count. $52,000. Her grandfather had saved it bond by bond, dollar by dollar, from a water commissioner's salary in a small Mississippi town in the 1950s. And he had sealed it in the foundation of the thing he was proudest of, hoping that someday the right person would find it. When she got back to the lot, Vernon was already there measuring lumber. She told him about the bonds. He set down his tape measure and was quiet for a long time. Well, he said finally, that changes a few things. It does. You could leave, $52,000 in a piece of property, cash out, sell the lot, start fresh somewhere with real walls and running water. Tamika looked at the foundation at the half-built wall frame at Duke, who was lying in a patch of sun watching them. Isaiah did not save that money so someone could leave, she said. He saved it so someone could stay. Vernon nodded slowly. Then let's build something worth staying for. But before they could continue, Tamika needed to know more. That evening, she sat with the journal again and found something she had missed. The journal's last entry, the one from 1963, about Ellen's treatment and Kiara's shoes, was not the last page that had been written on. She had assumed the rest of the journal was blank. She had been wrong. 40 pages from the back, starting from the rear cover, and working forward, there were more entries. Different ink, shakier handwriting. The pen had pressed harder into the paper, and the letters were uneven, written by hands that had aged decades since the front of the journal. The first of these back section entries was dated November 4th, 1997. I have not written in this journal in 34 years. Ellen is gone. She passed on March 9th, 1970. Cancer. I held her hand until the end and promised her I would take care of Kiara. I broke that promise. Tamika turned the page. Kiara left home when she was 17. Same age Ellen was when she left her parents' house. Same stubbornness. She packed a bag one night and was gone by morning. Left a note that said she would call when she was ready. She never called. I spent 3 years looking. Hired a private investigator with money I did not have. He found traces. A job in Indianapolis, an apartment in Columbus, a name on a lease in Dayton. But by the time he tracked her to one city, she had already moved to the next. She did not want to be found. I stopped looking in 1974. The entries continued spaced years apart. Isaiah wrote about turning 70, then 75. He wrote about health problems, a heart condition that required medication he could barely afford, a knee that needed replacing, the slow inventory of a body wearing out. Then in an entry dated June 2000, the handwriting changed again. Urgent messy. A woman from the state of Ohio called me today, a social worker named Mrs. Kessler. She said my daughter Kiara died in a car accident on January 19th of this year. She was 49 years old. Tamika stopped breathing. Mrs. Kessler said Kiara had a daughter, a little girl named Tamika. She is 4 years old. Kiara had listed me as next of kin on a form she filled out at the hospital when Tamika was born. That is how they found me. The first time anyone has found me in decades. The handwriting blurred. Tamika wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and kept reading. I asked Mrs. Kessler if I could take Tamika. She said there would be an evaluation. I am 80, I have a heart condition. I live in a one-room apartment. I do not have a car. I told her I would do whatever it took. She said she would be in touch. The next entry was 2 weeks later. The state denied my petition. They said I am too old, too sick, too unstable to care for a child. They said Tamika would be placed in the foster system where she would receive proper care from qualified guardians. I told them I am her grandfather. They said that was not enough. Tamika set the journal down. She pressed her palms flat against the concrete and concentrated on the feeling of solid ground under her hands because the rest of the world had gone sideways. Isaiah had tried to find her. He had known about her. He had asked for her and been told no. She had spent 16 years in the system believing nobody had ever come looking, that she had been passed along because there was nobody at the other end of the chain who wanted her. And the whole time an 80-year-old man in Missouri had been fighting to bring her home. Duke pushed his head under her arm, and she held on to him while she steadied herself. Then she picked up the journal again. The entries after the denial were short. Isaiah wrote about calling Mrs. Kessler every month asking for updates on Tamika. She gave him very little. Tamika was in a group home. Tamika was doing well in school. Tamika had been moved to a different facility. He wrote about sending things, a blanket he had knitted himself, a photograph of Kiara as a baby, a letter addressed to Tamika. He did not know if any of them were delivered. Most of them probably were not. Then in his last entry dated September 12, 2004, Isaiah wrote something that made Tamika's chest crack open. I am going back to Thornton. I know the tower is probably gone or falling apart. I know the town does not remember me, but the box is still there. I sealed it to last 100 years. Inside that box is everything I have left to give. I have written a letter. I am putting it in the box with the bonds and the photographs. Whoever finds it, whether it is Tamika or someone else who carries the Washington name, they will know what happened. They will know I tried. I am leaving tomorrow morning. It is a 9-hour drive. My heart is not good, but I have got enough medication to get there and back. I just need to open the foundation, add the letter, and seal it again. If I can do that, then at least something of me survives in the place where I did my best work. I built that tower to give water to a town that needed it. I am going back to make sure it still gives something to whoever comes next. That was the last thing Isaiah Washington ever wrote. Tamika sat in the glow of the setting sun for a long time, the journal in her lap. She did not move, did not speak. Duke lay with his head on her knee, his eyes half closed. She needed to know what happened. Isaiah had written that he was driving to Thornton. The box had been sealed with a letter inside, which meant he had made it here. But what happened after? The sealed letter, the one addressed to whoever carries the Washington name forward. She had been saving it, waiting until she understood enough of the story to read it properly. Now she understood. She reached into the oilcloth bundle and pulled out the envelope. Her hands were steadier than she expected. She broke the seal and unfolded 2 pages of the same shaky handwriting. To whoever carries the Washington name forward, if you are reading this, you found your way here. You found the tower or what is left of it. You found the chamber I built into the foundation when I was 37 years old and still believed I could outsmart the people who wanted to take what I had built. My name is Isaiah Washington. I was the water commissioner of Thornton from 1955 to 1961. I built this tower with my own hands, hired a crew of 4 men and poured every foundation, welded every beam, and tested every valve myself. It was the best thing I ever did for this town. The second best thing I ever did was raise my daughter, Kiara, in it. I lost both. The tower was taken from me by politics and greed. Kiara was taken from me by my own stubbornness and the bad luck that follows people who make one wrong choice at the wrong time. Isaiah's letter continued for another page. He told about his life, about growing up in Jim Crow, Mississippi, about teaching himself engineering from library books because the white colleges would not admit him, about serving in the war with the 92nd Infantry Division, coming home to a country that still would not let him drink from the same water fountains as white people, about building the water system anyway because Thornton needed it and he had the skills to make it happen. He wrote about Kiara, about how she blamed him for leaving Thornton, for taking her away from her friends and her school, about how he had tried to explain that staying would have meant losing everything, but she was too young to understand, about how she had run away at 17 and he had never seen her again. And then he wrote about Tamika. I do not know who you are. Maybe you are Tamika, my granddaughter. Mrs. Kessler told me about you. 4 years old when I found out you existed. The state said I was too old to care for you. Maybe they were right, but I want you to know I tried. I drove to the courthouse in Jefferson City twice. I wrote 6 letters to the foster care board. I called every week for a year. They never let me see you. If you are not Tamika, that is okay too. Whoever you are, you found this place. You cared enough to look. That is enough. The bonds are yours. The land is yours. The photographs and the journal are yours. I built this tower to give water to a town that needed it. I built this chamber to give a future to whoever comes next. If you are reading this, you found your way home. Build something. Stay. Isaiah Washington, September 2004. Tamika folded the letter and held it against her chest. She breathed in and out slowly. He had made it. Isaiah had driven to Thornton, opened the foundation, added the letter, and resealed the chamber. Then he had left. And somewhere between Thornton and wherever he was going next, his heart had given out. She needed to confirm it. The next morning, she asked Loretta to help her search. Loretta drove her to the county library where they spent 2 hours on the microfilm machine, looking through old newspapers. They found it in the Thornton Register, October 8, 2004, a short article in the local section. An unidentified man was found deceased in his vehicle on Highway 45, approximately 40 miles west of Thornton. The county coroner determined the cause of death to be cardiac arrest. The vehicle, a 1991 Ford pickup registered to an Isaiah R. Washington of Springfield, Missouri, contained personal effects and road maps. No next of kin has been located. The remains were processed by the county medical examiner's office. 40 miles. He had been 40 miles from the town he had built the water system for. 40 miles from the tower. 40 miles from the chamber where he had just sealed his last letter to a granddaughter he had never met. Loretta put her hand on Tamika's shoulder and left it there. He was coming home, Tamika said. He made it far enough, Loretta said quietly. He sealed that letter. He left you everything he had. He made it far enough for that. They sat in the library for a while. The microfilm machine hummed. Dust floated in the light from the window. I want to build something on that land, Tamika said. A workshop. A place where people can come and fix things, learn to build, use their hands. She looked at Loretta. Isaiah built the water system to give the town something it needed. I want to do the same thing. Loretta nodded. I think that is exactly right. But before any of that could happen, there was the hearing. 3 weeks away. In the meantime, Tamika kept building. Vernon came every day. The frame of a small structure, 12 by 20 feet, began to rise on the north end of the foundation. It would be her home. One room with a sleeping area, a small kitchen, and a wood stove. Not fancy, but solid. You are good at this, Vernon told her one afternoon watching her set a rafter. Bernie used to say the best thing about fixing something is that it stays fixed. People do not always, but a wall you built right that stays. Vernon handed her another nail. Carol would have liked your grandmother. Bernie would have liked Carol. They worked in comfortable silence after that, the sound of hammers and the occasional protest from Duke when sawdust got in his nose. The week before the hearing, Loretta did something Tamika did not expect. At the regular town council meeting during the public comment period, Loretta stood up and addressed the room. Tamika was not there. She heard about it afterward from 3 different people, each of whom told the same story. Loretta walked to the microphone, looked directly at Dalton Pierce, who was sitting in the 3rd row, and said, Isaiah Washington built this town's water system. Every faucet in Thornton runs because of him. And Clayton Pierce, your grandfather drove him out for it. Now you want to take from a Washington again. You want to take the last piece of ground that family has left. She paused. This town owes a debt to the Washington name, and it is about time we started paying it. The room was quiet for a full 10 seconds after she sat down. Dalton did not respond publicly, but 2 days later, he came to Tamika's lot. Alone, no lawyer, no SUV. He drove a pickup truck and wore jeans and work boots. He stood at the gate and waited until Tamika came over. I will make you an offer, he said. His voice was different than before. Still businesslike, but the edge was gone. $25,000 for the half acre. Cash. You walk away with that plus whatever you got from the bonds. That is a fresh start. A real one. Tamika looked at him. She thought about what $25,000 would mean. Added to the $52,000 from the bus, it was enough to go somewhere warm, rent an apartment, take classes, build a life that did not involve sleeping under a tarp or wondering where the next meal would come from. No, she said. Dalton's jaw tightened. You are turning down $25,000. I am. Why? Tamika looked at the half-built frame behind her at Duke, who was watching from the doorway of the structure at the foundation her grandfather had poured with his own hands. Because my grandfather built this, she said, and your grandfather took it from him, and I am not going to let that happen twice. Dalton stared at her for a long time. Something moved behind his eyes, something she could not read. Then he turned, walked back to his truck, and drove away without another word. The hearing was set for a Tuesday morning in November. Tamika woke before dawn and put on the best clothes she had, a pair of black pants Loretta had bought her and a white button-down shirt from the thrift store. She brushed her hair and tied it back. She looked at herself in the small mirror Vernon had hung in her half-finished house and barely recognized the person looking back. Not a homeless girl sleeping in a dead car, not a foster kid nobody wanted. Someone else. Someone who belonged somewhere. Vernon drove her to the courthouse in his truck. Loretta met them on the steps. Inside, the meeting room was already filling up. Tamika saw faces she recognized. The diner owner, the plumber who had run her water line, Hank from the lumberyard, and people she did not know, older black folks who sat in the back rows and watched her with expressions she could not quite read. Dalton Pierce sat on the opposite side of the room with his lawyer, a white man in a gray suit who carried a leather briefcase. Dalton wore a sport coat and no tie. He did not look at Tamika. The 5 board members filed in and took their seats behind a long table. The chairman was a black woman named Dr. Patricia Webb, maybe 50 years old with silver-streaked hair and intelligent eyes. She called the meeting to order and read the formal complaint. Dalton's lawyer spoke first. He laid out the argument about the commercial overlay, the master plan, the improper surplus listing. He was smooth and organized and used words that sounded reasonable even when they were not. He talked for 15 minutes. Then it was Tamika's turn. She stood up and walked to the front of the room. She had never spoken in front of a group before. Her hands were shaking, so she held them flat on the podium. My name is Tamika Washington, she said. I am 20 years old. I bought lot 14 at the county surplus auction for $5 because I was homeless and I needed somewhere to sleep. She paused. The room was quiet. After I bought it, I found a sealed chamber in the foundation of the water tower. Inside was a journal written by my grandfather, Isaiah Washington, who built that tower in 1956. He was the water commissioner of this town. He designed the system that gives you your water. She opened the folder and held up the photograph of Isaiah standing in front of the half-built tower. This is him, Isaiah Washington. He was driven out of Thornton in 1961 after a man named Clayton Pierce pressured the town council to remove him so he could control the water rights. She looked at Dalton. Clayton Pierce was your grandfather. Dalton's jaw tightened. His lawyer shifted in his seat. Isaiah sealed his journal, his photographs, and his life savings into the foundation before he left. He spent 40 years trying to come back. He died on Highway 45, 40 miles from this courthouse, driving home. She set down the photograph and picked up the letter. He left a letter to whoever found the chamber. He said, "Build something, stay. That is what I am doing. I am not a developer. I do not have a commercial plan or a master plan or a lawyer with a briefcase. I have a cleared foundation, a half-built house, and a grandfather who wanted someone to care about this piece of land as much as he did." She stepped back from the podium. "That is all I have to say." The chairman asked if anyone else wished to speak. Vernon stood up. "I have been helping Tamika build for the past month. She works harder than anyone I have seen in 40 years of carpentry. She is building something real. The town needs more of that, not less." Loretta stood up. "My father knew Isaiah Washington, said he was the most honest man in Thornton. His granddaughter is the same. I have watched her clear rubble by hand, sleep on the ground, and refuse to quit. This town has owed the Washington family an apology for 60 years. The least we can do is let his granddaughter keep the land." A man Tamika did not recognize stood up. "I am Dave Perkins. I ran the water line to her property. She did not ask me to speak here today, but I wanted to. My house has water because Isaiah Washington built the system. His granddaughter deserves that lot." 3 more people stood. The woman from the church, the diner owner, Hank. Each one said something different, but the message was the same. Tamika belonged here. The land was hers. Then Dr. Patricia Webb did something unexpected. Before the board left to deliberate, she looked directly at Tamika and spoke. "Miss Washington, before we deliberate, I want you to know something. My grandmother was Ellen Washington's student at the colored school. She told me Ellen was the finest teacher she ever had. And she told me about Isaiah, how he would fix people's plumbing for free when they could not pay. How he made sure every black home in Thornton had clean water even when white plumbers refused to serve them." Webb's voice cracked slightly. "I have lived in this town my whole life, and I have always wondered what happened to the Washington family. Now I know, and I am ashamed it took this long for someone to tell that story." The board left to deliberate. Tamika sat in the front row between Vernon and Loretta. Duke was tied up outside, but she could hear him bark once through the window. She closed her eyes and thought about Isaiah, about the tower he had built, about the chamber he had sealed, about the 40 miles he had driven trying to get home. The board was gone for 45 minutes. When they returned, Dr. Webb's face was unreadable. She took her seat and picked up a piece of paper. "The board has reviewed the complaint filed by Pierce Development regarding the surplus auction of Lot 14. We find that the sale was conducted in accordance with county procedures and that no procedural error occurred. The complaint is denied. The sale stands." She looked at Tamika. "The property is yours, Miss Washington. Congratulations, and welcome home." Tamika thanked the board and walked out of the courthouse on legs that did not feel entirely solid. Loretta was waiting on the steps. Vernon was beside her. Duke, who had pulled his leash free from the bench, bounded over and nearly knocked her down. "It is mine," Tamika said. Loretta hugged her. It was quick and firm and exactly enough. Vernon shook her hand. "Let's get back to work." They drove back to the lot. Tamika spent the rest of the afternoon framing the last wall of her small house with Vernon working in silence, because neither of them needed words to know what this day meant. That evening, after Vernon had gone home and Loretta had stopped by with soup and bread, Tamika sat on the foundation with Duke and watched the stars come out. The same stars she had seen her first night here, when she had had nothing but a tarp and a duffel bag and a dog she had just met. She thought about Isaiah, 40 miles from home, his heart giving out in the driver's seat of a Ford pickup. She thought about Kiara running from a father who loved her and dying too young. She thought about Bernie, who had worked 2 jobs and taught Tamika to fix things and never once mentioned Thornton or Isaiah or any of it. Maybe Bernie had not known. Maybe Kiara had never told her about the town or the tower or the man who built it. Or maybe Bernie had known and decided the past was too painful to carry forward. Tamika would never know for certain, but it did not matter now. The story had found its way to her anyway. The next morning, Tamika woke to the sound of a truck engine. She pulled on her boots and stepped outside. A flatbed delivery truck was parked at the gate. 2 men were unloading stacks of fresh-cut lumber, setting them neatly along the fence line. Good lumber, straight and dry, better quality than anything Tamika had bought. "Who sent this?" she called out. The driver looked at his clipboard. Delivery order paid in full. No name on the slip. He handed her the receipt. The order was for 24 sheets of plywood, 42 by 6s, and a pallet of roofing materials. Enough to finish her house and start on something larger. The driver climbed back into the cab and pulled away. As the truck turned onto Tower Road, Tamika caught a glimpse of the logo on the tailgate. Pierce Development. She stood at the gate holding the receipt, looking at the lumber. Duke sat beside her, tail sweeping the ground. Vernon arrived an hour later and saw the delivery. "Well," he said, "that is something." They did not talk about it. They just got to work. 6 months later, on the first warm Saturday of April, Tamika stood in the doorway of her house and watched the workshop fill up. The house was small, 12 by 20 feet, one room with a sleeping loft above the kitchen area, a wood stove against the north wall, and a bathroom Vernon had plumbed himself over a weekend. The floor was plywood that Tamika planned to cover with hardwood when she could afford it. The walls were insulated and drywalled. The roof did not leak. It was the first home she had had since Bernie's apartment. She had built most of it with her own hands, and every time she set her palm against the doorframe, she felt the grain of the wood she had cut sanded and fitted. Duke lay on his bed beside the stove, head up ears tracking the noise outside. The workshop sat where the collapsed water tower had been. Vernon and Tamika had built it over the winter using the foundation as the floor and reclaimed steel from the tower's wreckage for the structural frame. The roof was corrugated metal. The sides were open on three faces with roll-down canvas panels for bad weather. A long workbench ran the length of the south wall, and tools hung from a pegboard that Loretta had donated from her store. It was not fancy, but it worked. Vernon was already out there setting up sawhorses for his Saturday carpentry class. He had been teaching it since January, and it had grown from 2 people to 11. Today, a father and his teenage son were building a bookshelf. 2 women from the church quilting group were learning to use a table saw. A man Tamika knew only as Maurice was restoring an antique rocking chair he had found at a yard sale. Morning, Vernon called when he saw Tamika. "Coffee is on." He had installed a coffee maker on the workbench in February. It sat between a belt sander and a jar of wood screws. Everyone who came to the workshop knew where it was. Tamika poured a cup and stood at the edge of the foundation watching people work. The April sun was warm on her face. Wildflowers had pushed up through the gravel along the fence line, yellow and purple claiming the ground. She was 21 now. In the fall, she would start online classes in structural engineering through the State University's extension program. She had chosen the field because of Isaiah, because she had read his journal entries about pipe layouts and pump pressures, and the satisfaction of designing a system that gave a whole town clean water. And she had recognized the same feeling she got when she sank a nail clean on the first swing. She worked part-time at Loretta's hardware store 4 days a week. Loretta paid her $10 an hour plus lunch, which Loretta always insisted on making herself. Sandwiches and fruit, and a thermos of soup that she claimed was leftovers, but Tamika suspected she cooked fresh every morning. "You are too thin," Loretta said every time Tamika protested. "I am the same weight I was last month." Too thin last month, too. It had become a routine. Tamika would walk to the store at 7, open up stock shelves, and help customers until 2. Then she would walk back to the lot and work on whatever project needed attention. The workshop, the house, the small garden she had started behind the east fence where she was growing tomatoes and beans because Bernie had always kept a window box of herbs, and Tamika wanted to see if she had inherited any of that instinct. She had. The tomatoes were already 6 inches tall. Loretta came by most evenings. Vernon came for dinner on Sundays. They ate at the small table Tamika had built from reclaimed lumber. Duke, lying under it, waiting for scraps he knew he was not supposed to get, but always did. "I burned the chicken," Loretta announced one Sunday, setting a foil-covered pan on the counter. "You burn the chicken every week," Vernon said. "I burn it on purpose. It adds flavor. It adds carbon. Purpose. It adds carbon." Tamika set the table and listened to them argue about poultry and felt something she had not had a word for until recently. Belonging. The sense of being in a room where people expected you to be there and would notice if you were not. She had not felt that since she was 14, sitting at Bernie's kitchen table, watching her grandmother sew buttons onto a coat and hum a song that had no name. On a Tuesday in late April, Tamika was at the workshop sharpening chisels when she heard footsteps on the gravel. She looked up and saw a girl standing at the gate. 17 maybe. thin with a garbage bag of clothes in one hand. She wore a hoodie that was too big for her and sneakers with the soles separating from the uppers. Tamika set down the chisel. The girl did not come in. She stood at the gate looking at the workshop and the house and the bone, and Tamika evaluating the situation the way people evaluate situations when they have learned that new places are usually worse than the last one. "Can I help you?" Tamika asked. "I saw the sign on the highway," the girl said. "Community workshop, free tools and classes." Tamika had put the sign up 2 weeks ago, hand-painted on a piece of plywood. Loretta had told her it looked like a child had made it, and Tamika had said good children need workshops too. "That is us," Tamika said. "Come in." The girl hesitated. Then she walked through the gate garbage bag bumping against her leg. Duke lifted his head, studied her, and put it back down. That was as close to approval as Duke gave strangers. "I am Tamika." "Shanice." "You hungry, Shanice? I have got peanut butter sandwiches and some of Loretta's soup." "Who is Loretta?" "She owns the hardware store in town. She makes soup like it is her job, which it is not. Her job is selling nails." A smile flickered across Shanice's face. Small, uncertain, but real. They sat at the workbench and ate. Shanice ate fast the way people eat when they are not sure when the next meal is coming. Tamika recognized it because she had eaten that way for 2 years. She did not ask Shanice questions. She had learned from her own experience that the worst thing someone could do when you were scared and hungry was interrogate you. So she talked about the workshop instead. What they built there, who came, how Vernon had accidentally glued his hand to a sawhorse last month and they had had to call Loretta for acetone. Shanice laughed at that, a real laugh, short but genuine. After lunch, Tamika showed her how to use a hand plane. Shanice picked it up quickly, taking long even strokes along a piece of pine, curling thin ribbons of wood off the surface. "You have done this before," Tamika said. "My foster dad, in the last place, had a garage," Shanice said, not looking up. "He taught me some stuff before they moved me." "Why did they move you?" Shanice shrugged. "Budget cuts, the home closed. I got transferred twice, then I aged out 3 weeks ago." "Where have you been sleeping?" "Bus station in Greenville, then a church that lets people stay in the basement. Then I started walking." Tamika watched her work the hand plane. Steady hands, focused eyes. A girl who had learned to be good at things because being good at things was sometimes the only control you had. "I have a spare room," Tamika said. Shanice looked up. "It is small, just a bed and a dresser. But the stove keeps the whole house warm and there is hot water." Shanice stared at her. "You do not even know me. I know you walked here with a garbage bag. I know you are hungry. I know you can use a hand plane better than half the people who come to this workshop." Tamika met her eyes. "I was where you are 2 years ago, sleeping in a car, eating gas station sandwiches. No plan, no family, no address. Someone let me stay. I am doing the same thing." "For how long?" Shanice asked. "For as long as you need." "What if I mess it up?" "Then we will fix it. That is what workshops are for." Shanice moved in that afternoon. Tamika gave her the spare room, a set of clean sheets and a towel. She showed her where the food was and told her the bathroom was hers whenever she wanted it. That night, Tamika heard the shower running for 45 minutes. She did not say a word about it. She remembered what it felt like to have unlimited hot water after months without it. You stood there until the feeling sank in. Over the next 2 weeks, Shanice settled. She was quiet and careful, moving through the house the way Tamika had once moved through new foster placements, trying not to take up space. Tamika gave her room. She did not push. She showed up at meals and left the rest to time. Shanice started helping at the workshop. She organized tools, swept the floor, and assisted Vernon during his Saturday classes. Vernon treated her the same way he treated everyone, with patient instruction and dry humor. "You are holding that saw like it owes you money," he told her during a lesson. "Relax your grip. Let the blade do the work. Like this. Better. Now stop looking at me and look at the cut line." Loretta brought extra food when she came by, always with a plausible excuse. "I made too much stew. The bakery gave me extra bread. These apples will go bad if someone does not eat them." Shanice accepted it all without comment, and Tamika noticed her eating more slowly as the days passed, less desperate, more present. One afternoon, Tamika drove Shanice to the high school in town to talk about enrollment. Shanice sat in the car staring at the building. "I have not been in a school in 2 years," she said. "I had not been in one in 6 when I started studying for my classes," Tamika said. "You do not have to figure it all out today. Just show up tomorrow." Shanice looked at her. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Tamika thought about that. She thought about Isaiah's letter about Bernie's sewing kit, about Loretta's gloves, and Vernon's toolbox, and the plumber who ran a water line for free. Because somebody cared what happened to me, she said, and the only way to pay that back is forward. Shanice enrolled the next day. On a Saturday in May, Tamika looked up from the workbench and saw Dalton Pierce walking through the gate. He had a girl with him, maybe 8 or 9, with dark braids and a serious expression. "This is my daughter, Elise," Dalton said. "She wants to build a birdhouse." Tamika looked at him. He looked different than he had at the hearing. His shoulders were lower, his voice was quieter. He held his daughter's hand and the grip was gentle. "Vernon teaches the Saturday class," Tamika said. "He has got birdhouse kits. Third workbench on the left." Dalton nodded. "Thank you." He walked his daughter to Vernon's station, and Vernon handed Elise a piece of pre-cut pine and a small hammer without comment. Dalton stood nearby watching his daughter tap nails into wood, and for a moment he looked like any other father at the workshop. Just a man watching his kid learn something new. He did not mention the lawsuit, did not mention the land or the auction or the Pierce name. He did not need to. He was standing in a workshop built on ground his grandfather had stolen from Tamika's grandfather, watching his daughter learn from the carpenter who had helped Tamika rebuild it. The circle had closed itself. Before he left, he stopped by Tamika's workbench. "She had a good time," he said, nodding toward Elise, who was carrying a lopsided birdhouse with visible pride. "She is welcome back anytime." Dalton paused. Something passed across his face, something Tamika recognized as the particular discomfort of a person who wants to say something honest and does not know how. "I'm sorry," he said, "about the hearing, about all of it." "I know," Tamika said. He left. That evening, after the workshop had emptied and Vernon had gone home and Shanice was inside doing homework at the kitchen table, Tamika sat on the porch of her house. Duke lay at her feet, his head resting on her boot. The air smelled like fresh cut wood and the wildflowers along the fence. She held Isaiah's journal in her lap. She had read it so many times that the pages were soft at the edges. She ran her thumb over the leather cover and thought about the hands that had written in it. Hands that had welded steel beams, poured concrete, built a tower that gave a whole town water. She thought about Bernie, who had braided her hair every morning and made oatmeal on the stove and taught her to thread a needle and patch a wall. Bernie, who had died on a Tuesday afternoon while Tamika was at school, and whose sewing kit still sat in its olive green tin on Tamika's dresser, right where she could see it when she woke up. She thought about Kiara, the mother she barely remembered who had run from Thornton and run from Isaiah, and ended up in a city where nobody knew her name. Kiara, who had put Isaiah's name on a hospital form when Tamika was born, the one thread that had led 20 years later back to this foundation. She thought about Isaiah driving down Highway 45 with a letter in his pocket and a bad heart and nothing left in the world except a box buried under a tower. 40 miles from home when his heart stopped. He had made it far enough. Loretta had been right about that. He had sealed the letter. He had left the bonds. He had done everything he could to make sure that whoever came next would have what he had not been able to give in person. Tamika looked at the workshop. The steel frame gleamed in the last light. Inside, tools hung on the pegboard. Sawdust covered the floor. Vernon's coffee maker sat between the belt sander and the wood screws. Tomorrow, Shanice would walk to school for the 3rd week in a row. Vernon would come by with a new project, probably another birdhouse, because Dalton's daughter had told 3 friends about the class. Loretta would open the hardware store at 7 and start making soup she would claim was leftovers. And Tamika would be here on the half-acre she had bought for $5, in the house she built on the foundation, her grandfather poured beside the workshop, where people came to learn and build and fix what was broken. She opened the journal one last time. She turned to the inside of the front cover, where Isaiah had written his name and the date he had started the job that defined his life. Isaiah Washington, Water Commissioner, Thornton, April 1955. Below it in pencil, Tamika wrote her own line. Tamika Washington Workshop, Thornton, April 2025. She closed the journal and set it on the chair beside her. Duke sighed and pressed closer against her leg. Through the window behind her, she could hear Shanice turning pages at the kitchen table. The stars were coming out. The same stars she had seen her first night on this lot, sleeping on the ground with nothing but a tarp and a stray dog. She had been so afraid that night. Afraid the way you are afraid when you have run out of places to go, and the only option left is to stay exactly where you are and hope it is enough. It had been enough. She sat on the porch of the house she had built on the land her grandfather had loved in the town that had finally welcomed a Washington back home. Duke breathed steadily at her feet. The workshop stood quiet in the dark, waiting for morning. Home is not where you are born, Tamika thought. It is where you stop running. And she had stopped.